Hey everybody, Dr. Phil here. This is going to be a video on the research process and kind of an overview of that research process. So there's really five stages to the research process. So stage one is clarify the research question. That's typically going to involve some exploration. Stage two is design the research. That's where we're going to design our data collection and also our sampling. Now we're not going to do the data collection or sampling. We're just going to design those two. Stage three is collect and prepare the data. Stage four is analyze and interpret the data. And by the way, stage three is often the most, a lot of inexperienced researchers look at stage three and they're like, oh yeah, that won't take long. Yeah, that will probably take you the most time. Again, stage four, analyze and interpret the data. And then stage five, report insights and recommendations. So stage one, clarify the research question. So as I said, this is where it's important to have kind of a robust, um, forward-thinking research question that's gonna, because if you screw up the research question, then you typically will screw up the rest of the research. You may kind of go down the wrong path. You may get sidetracked. You may end up not actually, as funny as it sounds, it's going to sound strange, but you may not answer the question that you had originally intended to. So, stage one, clarifying the research question is super important. Stage two, design the research design. So we as researchers spend a lot of time on this section, designing the research, right? As it says, figuring out how you're going to collect the data. Is it going to be primary versus secondary data? I'll talk about that more later on in the video. How are you going to make sure the sample is representative of the population? The odds are you're not sampling the whole population. Too expensive, too time consuming. Um, there's things that we can do for that. But this again, kind of like stage one, it's important that you spend time, careful and thoughtful time in stage two. Inexperienced researchers, they kind of want to rush through like one and two because like, oh, I just want to do the analysis, but you realize sometimes the hard way that you if you didn't set up stage one, stage two right, then stage three and four end up being faulty and erroneous. So yeah, design the research, data collection design, and sampling design, as we just discussed. Um, the only thing I'll say, the one more thing I'll say about sampling design is as follows. People always talk about getting a representative sample. And there's ways to do that. There's ways that you can, randomize your sampling design. But even with that said, I think that there's a lot of people that don't do a good job of that. They're looking for their research to say something in particular that they already kind of know what they want it to say, which of course that's never going to end well because the idea of scientific discovery is that you kind of let the data and the research show you what the truth is. Stage three, collect and prepare the data. So stage three, this is if you're an inexperienced researcher, this is the thing that you say, oh, that won't take any time at all. That depending on whether you use primary data versus second. If you're using secondary data, like data that's already available, then that's probably going to be shorter. But if you're using primary data and it's like, oh, let's do a research survey, let's survey, 10,000 people, it's going to take some serious time, and you're going to have things like response fatigue to deal with. People get tired of filling out a questionnaire. Maybe they don't fill it out accurately or honestly. Response rates are a problem. Then, a lot of people think, oh, if I send out, 100 surveys, I'll get 100 responses. No, you won't. You might get 25. This is, a lot of people just they forget about it. They get too busy. There's not enough of an incentive for them to do it. So, yeah, stage three is often pretty time consuming. So we collect the data, we deal with any data errors and omissions. Um, that's important too because a lot of times, even when you're dealing with secondary data, like I do a lot with secondary data, being an accounting and finance researcher, and even then, it doesn't guarantee that even when if I'm downloading say like financial statements from a big company for the last say 10 years, you would sort of assume that every value would be there, but and sometimes they are, but a lot of times those values are not there. So you have to think about ways to, do I leave it at zero? Do I maybe put the average in? Do I do some imputing? There's ways to deal with that, but you run into a lot of problems at this stage that you probably wouldn't expect to have. Um, you may want to reduce the data to a manageable size. That's it's not that big of a problem these days because we have we've got tools like SPSS, R Stata that can just deal with massive amounts of data, and they can run the analysis very effectively and very robustly, even with those big amounts of data. And then we're going to want to develop summaries. So, things like the mean, the median, the mode. We may look at if we're dealing with a whole population, obviously that's parameters, but most times we're not. We're dealing with a sample, so that's where we get the statistics, right? Again, mean, median, mode, so on and so forth. So data collection protocols, consistency equals verifiable data, and consistency is not equal to truthfulness. So just because just because you get, maybe you get the same answer consistently, that doesn't mean that it's truthful, right? People may have a reason to lie about it. For example, if people may want to underreport their income because they're worried that, the tax man, the IRS, is going to come after them. So that would be an example of where, yeah, maybe all these people in the survey are underreporting their income simply because they're like, well, I haven't paid taxes on it, and I don't want to, don't want to have to do that. So yeah, data types. I kind of touched on primary versus secondary. So I think about primary data as data that you collected, like it's being collected for the first time. Think about the name. Primary is in first. Secondary data is basically everything else. It's data that's already out there. So if I go download, if I go to IBM's financial statements, download their financial statements for the last, say, 3 to 5 years, then that would be secondary data, right? Because I'm not like kind of creating or collecting that data, right? It's already there. Somebody's already put that together. I'm just basically using it. So data levels and characteristics. So I've talked about this in other videos, but nominal is think about like naming it. What's another word for name? Classification. Ordinal, there's a certain order. So like for example, like freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. Interval just kind of speaks to that there's an equal distance between data points, right? And then ratio speaks to the sort of the natural origin in mathematics, if you will. So the research process, analyze and interpret the data. Now, this, depending on how what you're using to do that, like I typically use a program called SPSS. That's an IBM product. It stands for Statistical Package for the Social Sciences. Um, Even with a big data set, I can hit a button and within a couple of seconds, just run the analysis, and it's giving me, I'm looking at the output and I'm looking at all the values that I think are important. So this stage is actually not typically all that long necessarily. Now, understanding the analysis, obviously, you have to be trained in statistics, perhaps to a lesser extent, some calculus to understand what the system is, these systems are telling you. Interpreting is important because, you know, I think a lot of times people do surveys and they already know what they want it to say, and they kind of make sure it does say that, or they make sure they interpret it to say what they want. And that's not technically always factual, right? The goal of data interpretation is to interpret it as unbiased, without any sort of, ulterior motive, if you will. And then stage five, report the insights and recommendations. So perhaps somebody, you know, asked you to do the survey, you were commissioned to do a survey, and then you would report the findings back to those individuals or those, the firm, the university, whomever it may be. Research process pitfalls to avoid. An ill-defined management problem. So kind of like speaks to what we were saying in the very beginning of this sort of video lecture, which is if you don't ask the right question, it may be because you didn't identify the problem correctly. So it's important to do that. Some questions are unresearchable. So if I said, I'm going to solve, what is the meaning of the universe? Well, um, to a lot of people, that's going to be an unresearchable question. Manages hidden agendas. As I said, a lot of times hidden agendas, ulterior motives kind of come into the research. You may be commissioned to do a research study and they already tell you what they wanted to say. So that's another problem you may deal with. And also researcher inexperience. Maybe the researcher thinks that they've crafted they've come up with a good research question, and it's not, it's going to lead them down the wrong path. Or perhaps they don't realize how much time they're going to spend collecting the data. Perhaps they didn't anticipate that they would only get, say, 20% response rate on survey questionnaires they send out. So a lot of this is you kind of learn as you go. Hopefully, you have a good mentor as you go through. Typically, through a PhD program is where a doctoral program is where you learn these kind of skills typically. And then for those of us that had a good, PhD supervisor, then, we were sort of trained how to do this, and we were kind of told, hey, don't make the mistakes I did. I did this, I should have done that, so on and so forth. All right, thanks for watching this video, and I will see you all soon in a future video.